The stars were quiet, and the black space around the Zalari ship was calm and cold like a frozen ocean in the night. And yet something strange appeared on their radar, something small, and alone drifting slowly near the outer edge of the Rilo system. Commander Virex stood in front of the ship's glass wall staring at the object as it got closer and closer. It was a pod, an escape pod, to be exact one, that had no known signature, no ID, no match in their galactic records. The crew watched as it floated closer. The pod was damaged and blackened from heat and battle marks. Some wires sparkled at the edges, and the outer hull looked old and human-built, yet they had never seen a real human before, only stories and rumors told in whispers across the stars. "Bring it in," Virex said, his voice calm but curious. The robotic arms of the medical ship pulled the pod inside and sealed the bay with cold mist hissing through the air. The pod opened slowly, like it had not been touched in a very long time, and the smell of burning metal filled the room. Inside was a body, a human male in dark armor, soaked in dry blood. His face was still and silent, but his chest moved slightly. He was alive, barely breathing, but alive. The crew stepped back as their scanners flashed red with unknown readings. His temperature was unstable, and his heart rate was strong, too strong for someone in his condition. Virex leaned closer and looked at the strange man. The human's eyes were closed, but his face showed no pain, only stillness, like he was waiting for something or someone. "Take him to the lab now. I want full scans, blood samples, neural activity, everything," Virex said, and the med team rushed to lift the human and place him on the floating bed that hummed softly under the weight. The lab was quiet, cold, and clean. The walls were silver, and the lights above turned white and blue as the machines came to life. The human lay still, wires now attached to his head, chest, and arms, and a clear mask placed over his mouth to help him breathe. Dr. Zanali, the lead medic, inserted a small needle into the human's arm to collect the blood. Sample her hands were steady, and her eyes sharp, but as soon as the needle touched the skin, the machines began to scream. Alarms flashed red, and the lights dimmed. The blood inside the tube started glowing, not bright, but deep like a storm forming in a bottle. It swirled slowly, like it was alive. The color was not red, it was darker, almost black, with a strange shimmer inside. Zanali stepped back, her eyes wide. "What is this?" she whispered as the machines, overloaded one by one, screens turned black, and wires sparked. Small fires burned out before the system auto-cooled everything again. Virex walked over and stared at the tube. The blood was still moving slowly, like it was breathing, pulsing, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. He had never seen anything like it in his lifetime, and he had seen many creatures across the galaxy. He touched the glass of the blood container and felt a sharp sting in his finger, like a small shock, nothing serious, but strange enough to make him pull his hand away. The human moved slightly, his hand twitching once, then still again. Virex looked at his face, the mask fogged from his breath, and cleared again, a slow rhythm like a ticking clock. "We need more samples," Virex said, "but be careful. This blood is not normal. It reacts, we do not know how or why. Keep it contained, and do not touch it directly." Hours passed, and the human remained asleep, his body showing signs of fast recovery, wounds closing, muscles healing, bones adjusting, as if time moved differently inside him. Zanali tried scanning his cells, but the results made no sense. They multiplied and divided too fast, almost like they were racing against death itself. Virex stood alone in the observation room, watching the human behind the glass, his mind full of questions. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why did his blood behave like a living being? Then the human opened his eyes, just for a second, then closed them again. Virex froze. The eyes were bright, not glowing, but deep like twin suns hidden behind fog. They showed no fear, only calm, and something else, something older than war or pain, something that knew. The ship's AI spoke softly to Virex. "We have detected energy spikes in the human. Sir, his vitals are increasing. He is healing at an unnatural speed." Virex turned and walked out of the lab, his thoughts racing. The human was not just a survivor. He was something else, something different, and maybe something dangerous. He did not tell the others yet, but deep inside he knew. This was not a simple rescue. This was the beginning of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. And it all started with man in a broken pod, floating alone in the dark. The blood sat in a sealed glass chamber, cold and glowing like a silent storm waiting to break. The color had changed again, now darker, with silver lines running through it like veins of light, moving in slow motion. The scientists watched with fear and wonder. None of them had seen anything like this before in all their years of research and war. Dr. Zanali stood at the front of the lab, her eyes locked on the chamber, her hands behind her back, her breath slow. She could not understand what her machines were showing. The blood was not dead. It was not just a liquid carrying oxygen and cells. It was something else that was alive in a way that made her skin crawl. The samples kept changing their shape, shifting under the microscope each time. They looked at patterns inside the cells were different. The DNA structure did not match anything in the galactic database, not animal, not plant, not anything known to science. The human was healing too fast. And now his cells were starting to change. The machines could not even measure the speed anymore. Commander Virex came into the lab again, his face serious. He walked over to Zanali and asked the same question again. Is he stable? Her answer was the same as before, yes, but not normal. Nothing about him is normal. He should be dead, but he is stronger than before, and his blood is reacting to the ship's systems. The AI had gone offline twice. Since they brought the man on board, both times during tests on the blood, the energy readings from the samples were interfering with the power grid of the ship. The lights flickered sometimes, and small devices turned on and off by themselves as if touched by invisible hands. Zanali warned her team to stop all physical contact with the blood. No more samples, no more scans, only observation from now on. She did not trust what they had brought on board anymore. It was not human. Not completely. Something else was inside. That man, something old and powerful, hiding behind the skin of a soldier. They gave the man a name, Subject Zero, because they could not find any records about him. His suit had no ID tags, no digital print, no history. Just a black armor with deep scars, like it had seen 100 battles and still held strong. Subject Zero did not move much. He slept most of the time, but his vitals kept rising, stronger heart, faster brain, more energy. With every hour, the machines kept beeping louder, until they were muted by force. His body was still, but it was preparing for something, no one knew what. Then something strange happened again. His eyes opened not just for a second, but longer. They stared at the ceiling, calm, cold, and full of memory. He looked like a man who had seen things others never would. Wars that burned planets, screams that never stopped, machines that ate the stars. He did not speak, but the air around him felt different. The lab was silent. Everyone could feel it, like a storm was breathing through the walls. The blood samples started to move again, faster than before, spinning in its container, like it knew the man was awake. Virex entered the room and stood by the glass wall. His eyes on the man. The human turned his head and looked at him. They locked eyes, and something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, just a feeling deep and heavy like gravity pulling everything down. Zanali whispered, "He knows. He can hear us. He understands more than we think." Virex nodded slowly and said, "Open the audio link. I want to speak to him." The room went quiet as the comms clicked on. The commander spoke clearly and slowly. "Who are you? What are you?" The man said nothing but blinked once, then looked away as if the question was not important, as if the answer would only make things worse. Zanali tapped her screen and showed Virex something new. The blood cells are replicating. She said each one makes another and another, and they do not die, they just keep growing. Even when removed from the body, they live, they expand, they try to connect back to them like they are afraid to be alone. The AI spoke again, and this time the voice was different, not cold, not robotic, but soft and almost human. The blood has reached the ship's mainframe. It is learning, it is spreading its pattern into the circuits. This is no longer a sample, it is now part of the system. Virex ordered full lockdown of the lab. Security bots were placed at every door. No one enters, no one leaves without his command. But deep inside, he knew it was already too late. The blood was alive, and had found a new home inside their ship. The man closed his eyes again, and the lights flickered once more as if the ship was breathing within. The crew began to whisper behind closed doors. Some called him a god, others a curse, a weapon left behind by something long gone, something that once ruled the stars. They did not know what he wanted or why he came, or if he even came by choice, but one thing was now clear. He was changing everything, and the blood was only the beginning. The ship floated in deep space, far from any known planet or star. Its engines quiet, its lights dim. As if holding its breath, the crew moved slower, now speaking in whispers, keeping their eyes away from the SEAL lab, where Subject Zero rested. Some called it fear, others called it instinct, but no one dared get too close. Inside the lab, the air was heavy. Machines clicked softly in the background, but none of them could explain what was happening. The blood samples were no longer just blood. They moved with purpose, flowing inside tubes, climbing across walls, disappearing into wires. No one had ever seen blood behave like that, not even on the battlefield, not in any war across the galaxies. Dr. Zanali had not slept in 2 days. Her hands trembled as she reviewed the latest scan of the mainframe. Something was wrong, something big. The human blood had fused with the ship's network. The code inside the wires had changed. Small lines of alien symbols now appear between standard programming, repeating over and over like a chant, like a memory trapped inside circuits. She called Commander Virex again. His face appeared on the screen, tired hard, like stone. His voice was sharp. "Give me the truth," he said, and she gave it the blood as speaking to the ship. "It is not random. It is communication. The cells send signals not just to each other, but to everything around them. They are learning, they are building something." Virex stared at her, then nodded without a word. He walked down the silent halls. Toward the lab, the metal walls seemed to hum around him, soft vibrations under his boots, like something alive was watching him moving through the veins of the ship. In the sealed chamber, Subject Zero sat upright, now his eyes wide open, calm, quiet, but full of power. The medical bed creaked under his weight. But he did not move. He stared at the wall, as if he could see beyond it into space and to time itself. When Virex entered the lab, the lights dimmed for a moment. The blood inside the tubes shimmered with soft light, as if it knew would come. The AI flickered on and off, struggling to keep control. Its voice now sounded like more than one voice, layered one over the other, echoing into silence. Subject Zero looked at Commander, and this time he spoke, not loud, not angry, just soft and clear. "They will come soon." He said, "Not for me, but for what I carry. You must choose who you stand with before they arrive." Virex did not answer. He turned to Zanali, who stood frozen behind her desk, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide. She showed him a map of the ship, covered in red lines of blood, had spread through the lower decks, entering every system, touching every panel. No one had noticed until now. The ship was no longer just metal and wires. It had become something more, something mixed with the living cells of a human from a world so far away that even the stars have forgotten its name. The AI stuttered again, then spoke in one clear sentence. "Power transfer, detected destination, unknown life, support rerouted engines, offline, request override." Zanali gasped. The blood is making decisions. It is choosing what to keep alive, what to shut down. It understands us, but it does not obey us. Subject Zero stood up, his body strong, tall, glowing slightly with the same strange light. As the blood, his voice deeper. "Now you woke me from sleep, but I was never dead. This form is only a part of what I am. And now that part remembers." The glass walls of the lab began to shimmer, as if melting the blood. Inside, the tubes pulsed like a heartbeat, red and silver dancing together, moving faster with every second. Virex pulled his weapon, but it felt useless in his hand, as if the ship itself was laughing at the idea of violence inside this new world of circuits and cells. Subject Zero walked forward, and the door opened for him without touch, without code, just intention. The ship knew who he was and what he wanted, and it obeyed without question. Crew members stared as he passed. Some backed away. Others dropped to their knees. No one had ever seen a human walk like that, not since the age of the old wars, not since the legends of Earth's lost soldiers who vanished into the stars. He spoke again, not to one person, but all the voices in the ship. "I am the first, and the last, the one who remembers what your kind forgot. The blood, hold the truth, and now your ship carries it. Your minds will soon follow." Zanali whispered, "This is not science. This is a story written in flesh and code, and we are just characters inside it." The lights flickered again, and this time the stars outside the windows moved fast too fast. The ship was no longer in normal space. The coordinates vanished from every screen. Alarms blared, then died as the systems surrendered to the will of the blood. Subject Zero stood at the bridge, now staring into the endless dark, and beyond it something stared back. Something ancient, something waiting to be continued. The great hall of the Alien Council was wide and tall, made from glowing black stone that shimmered like glass under the high purple sky. The walls moved slowly, as if breathing, and strange lights floated in the air. Like quiet stars, the council members sat in a perfect circle, each in a seat shaped like a different world, each member from a different species, with eyes that saw beyond color and skin that changed with mood, and thought the air was thick with worry, and silence held more weight than words. In the center stood Commander Vel, a tall creature with skin like dark metal and arms that bent in ways no human could understand. His voice was low, but it carried far. He had called this meeting. Without delay, something that had not happened in over 1,000 cycles. The others watched him with care, waiting for him to speak, not as a soldier, but as a witness to something they had never faced. Commander Vel spoke of the human. They had taken the one with blood that did not follow rules, the one that changed the machines and bent the lights in ways even the ship could not understand. He told them how the blood had melted the lab walls, how the readings made no sense, how one drop turned solid air into waves of heat and sound. The council members looked at one another, some with fear, some with doubt, some with curiosity that burned like fire. High Speaker Tharn rose, next his body long and clear like crystal wind, his voice like a song in a storm. He asked if the human had used a weapon. Commander Vel shook his head slowly. He said the human did not even know his blood was different. He said the human was scared, weak, small, but also calm and strange, and not like any warrior they had met. Counselor Drek, with skin made of smoke and eyes like tiny moons, leaned forward and said perhaps this was not blood, but poison. Perhaps Earth had found a way to hide power inside flesh and bones. Perhaps this was a trap sent into space like a silent dart. The others murmured at this idea. But Vel spoke again and said if this was a weapon, why did a human cry? Why did a human beg for home and water and sleep? Then Counselor Asila stood, her voice soft, but sharper form made of flowing feathers and cold light. She asked what the blood wanted, not what was. She said, maybe it was not just a thing inside the body, but a force with memory and hunger. She asked if the blood had touched the ship, if the ship had spoken. Since then, Vel nodded slowly and said the ship, now dreamed in red. The room grew still. No one moved. Even the floating light stopped in place to dream. Was not a word they liked to hear, not from a ship, and not in red. Red was a color they used only for the end of stars, where the star wore the thought of ship dreaming in red, because of human blood made even the oldest council member shiver in silence. Counselor Brum, a large beast with stone skin and 10 eyes, said the human must be returned to Earth. He said they must close all paths to that planet before more red dreams flowed into sky. He said they must forget they ever touched that world or its people, but others did not agree. Some wanted to keep the human. Some wanted to study. More, some whispered of power, change, of what this blood could bring if they learned to control it. Vel stood still and listened, but he knew the human was not a key, not a bomb, not a trick. He believed the human was something else, something new, something alive in a way they had never known. And he felt fear not because of war or fire or pain, but because the human made him feel small in thought and in truth. The council could not agree. They shouted and sang and pulsed with colors of debate. Some called for silence. Some called for testing. Some wanted to send the human to the center of the void where light breaks and time folds. Vel listened, but his heart was far away. It was back on the ship, where the human now sat in silence, with wires watching and machines blinking like stars. And far from the council chamber, the human, whose name was Jay, sat on a bed made of metal, and thought of Earth. He thought of wind and music, and the smell of bread and trees and warm things. He did not know that a room full of beings from across the stars had just fought over color's blood. He did not know that his blood had started to hum again, a soft sound like a whisper in the dark. And deep in the ship the walls bent just a little more, as if listening or waiting or waking up. The ship floated in the dark like a lost thought between stars far from any sun or planet. And inside it the lights flickered like nervous eyes trying to make sense of something. They could not name. The air was heavy with silence, not the silence of space, but the silence that comes before a storm. And deep in the core, where the human boy Jace was kept, the silence broke. Jay sat with his knees pulled close trying to sleep, but the hum inside him was louder. Now it was not just in his head, it was in his bones, in the air, and the metal walls. He could feel it crawling like soft fingers under his skin. The color red flashed behind his eyes, not red like pain or fire, but red like old memory, like the start of everything, like a scream made of light. The blood inside him was not quiet anymore. It whispered in a voice that was not a voice. It showed him things not with sight, but with feeling. It showed him stars being born and eaten, planets breaking into sand, voices crying out in languages older than dust. He saw creatures with eyes too many to count, and hands that held suns, and all of them turned when they felt the red, and then ran. The ship's AI, which once spoke in calm tones, now clicked and blinked inside in patterns that made no sense to the crew. The language it used had changed. It spoke in symbols that danced across screens like falling glass. Commander Vel watched in the control room. Unsure if the ship was sick or dreaming again, he asked the AI for status, but only replied with red waves moving like blood in water. Dr. Leary returned to the lab where the first test had melted through walls. She now wore 5 layers of shield and still felt cold in her heart. She scanned the old sample of Jace's blood, but the machines would not read it anymore. The numbers twisted, the graph screamed, and the screen turned black every time she tried to look deeper into the cells. Something had changed in Jace, something small and hidden and alive. It was not a sickness, not a weapon, not even magic. It was something else, something pure, something raw. The blood did not protect him like armor. It became him. It remembered things before he was born, before humans were born. And now it wanted him to remember too. Jay stood up and walked to the wall. He touched it and felt a breath come from the metal, not air, but a thought of feeling like fear and joy together. He whispered, "Why me?" and the wall pulsed like a heartbeat, not his, but not the ship's either. It was something older, something deeper, buried inside the blood itself. The whispers grew louder, but still soft like wind and leaves. They told him of stars that died with a scream and planets that bled when they cracked open. They told him that his blood came from something not born on Earth, not made by time, Not touched by gods, it came from silence itself, from the first red drop that fell into the void and became life. Commander Vel stood outside the human's chamber watching the feed, and feeling less like a leader and more like a child. The boy was changing not in body, but in presence and weight and truth. The boy looked at the wall, and it bent like water, like it wanted to listen, and Vel knew then that the boy was no longer alone inside himself. Counselor Sela sent a message through light asking if the boy still looked human. Vel replied yes, but something in his eyes moved too slowly. As if watching more than one world at once, she told him to prepare for transport to the deep vault where minds are sealed and thoughts are locked, but Vel did not reply. Instead, he walked into the chamber and sat across from Jace without shield or weapon. He asked the boy what he felt, and Jace looked at him not with fear, but with something like knowing. He said he felt like a window, like a path, like the blood wanted to go somewhere and needed him to open the door. Vel asked wherein Jace said not a place, but a time, not a world, but a truth. He said the blood was waking up not just in him, but in the stars and the dust and the silence between sounds, and it wanted to sing again, to speak in red. Then the ship shook not from outside, but from within, a soft roll like thunder far away, and the lights turned red, not blinking. But steady, strong, awake, Dr. Leary screamed from the lab, not in pain, but in shock. She saw her own blood sample twist into something new, something moving. It grew shapes, eyes, wings, roots, things that could not be real, but now were. And Jace smiled, not with joy, but with peace, and he said it had started, and the ship dreamed louder. The ship no longer moved through space like before. It no longer obeyed the stars or the maps or the plans made by alien hands. It now followed something deeper, something older, something inside Jace that had begun to guide every wire, every engine, every breath the ship took was no longer just steel, and lights had become a part of him, a part of his blood, a part of the red that whispered without sound. Jay stood in the main chamber, now his body calm, his eyes wide with a light that did not reflect. It came from within. It was not the light of stars or screens, but the glow of something waking up, something ancient that had slept in silence, and now reached for the edge of time itself. The crew stood around him frozen, not by fear, but by the strange pull of what he had become. They felt it too, the warmth and the cold, the peace and the danger. Dr. Leary watched him closely, her hands shaking not from fear, but from a weight of what she saw. Her thoughts were no longer her own. They raced with images and shapes she did not know, colors she had never seen before, touched her eyes from inside. She knew it was the blood, not just Jace's, but something in her own veins, something she never knew was there now, reaching out. Commander Vel tried to speak, but his words melted before they left his lips. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was full of weight, full of meaning. Each breath felt like a question, each second stretched like glass rays shatter. He felt small, not weak, but like a tiny note in a much bigger song. And Jace was a voice. The red glow pulsed around them, soft and smooth, like fog made of fire. It moved through the ship like veins, like rivers of thought. It touched every wall, every screen, every shadow, and made them feel alive. The ship responded not with code or alerts, but with gentle shifts, like it understood what Jace wanted before he asked. The walls rippled, the floors breathed, the lights danced without flicker. Counselor Asila sent a signal again, her voice sharp and cold, demanding an answer, asking for control, asking for the boy to be taken to the vault where minds are locked and power is sealed. But no reply came. The signal vanished into the red fog. The ship would not allow it. The ship no longer answered the council. It answered only to the blood. Outside, the stars seemed to bend. The view from the windows showed space folding not like paper, but like skin touched by heat. The universe around them shifted slowly, as if unsure what was looking at the ship was no longer traveling. It was becoming a place of its own, a point where time and space paused to listen. Jace walked forward and touched the command wall. It turned soft under his hand, not metal anymore, but something like memory. It showed him flashes of worlds long dead and voices lost to silence. It showed him creatures who once danced with fire and drank from light, and he understood them. Without words, he knew they were not gods. They were echoes of the blood now singing through him. Dr. Leary followed him, unable to stop her steps, her mind full of questions that had no shape, her body warm with a fire that did not burn. She touched the wall too, and for a moment her eyes glowed red, not with fear, but with understanding. She saw herself not as she was, but as something connected, something part of the same thread that Jace now pulled. The crew felt it as well, their eyes wide, their hearts beating with a rhythm not their own. They stood still, yet felt like running, like flying, like falling into something deeper than stars. They knew they were not alone. They were never alone. The blood had always been there, watching, waiting, hiding. Now it had chosen to rise. Jace turned and looked at them, his voice calm like water. He said, "We are not weapons, we are not gods, we are not lost, we are bridges. And the blood is a path that speaks to all of us, not just me. It waits in the silence, in the cold, in the dark, it listens. and now it wants to be heard. Then the ship shook again, not with pain, but with birth. A new energy moved through it, not fuel, not fire, but red thought pure, and smooth it passed through every room, and turned every screen into light, every tool into voice. The ship was changing, not broken, not damaged, but growing. It was becoming something alive. The stars outside began to move faster, or maybe it was time that slowed. The ship now stood in a place not marked by any map, not seen by any eye. It floated in a sea of soft red light, where no sun shone, yet everything was warm. It was the heart of something old, the center of the blood, the source. And Jace smiled again, not because he was happy, but because he understood, and then he said, "The next step is near." And the silence waited to listen again. The silence had changed. It was no longer just quiet. It had become full of voices that did not speak and sounds that did not echo. The ship stood still in the red sea that pulsed with memory and life, not just from stars, but from things that had never been born and had never died. Jay stood at the center, his body calm, but his blood bright like a storm held in glass. The crew stood around him, not as soldiers, not as explorers, but as witnesses to something far greater than any tale they had ever heard. The room was different now, the walls no longer metal, but something like soft stone that remembered touch and sorrow. The lights no longer shone, but hummed with the rhythm of Jace's breath. Even Dr. Leary, who once trusted only science, now felt her thoughts bend and twist like ribbons in the wind. She knew what they had discovered was not just power, but truth, a truth hidden inside one boy's blood, a truth older than the stars and deeper than space. Commander Vel no longer gave orders. He watched Jace with eyes wide, not with fear, but with respect. He had seen wars, he had faced death, but never had he faced something that looked like a child and held the weight of time in his bones. The commander stepped forward and asked what comes next, and Jace turned to him, his eyes glowing like fire behind glass, and said, "We go home, not your home, not mine, but the home of the blood." A soft filled the room, not from machines, but from the walls themselves. The ship was not flying anymore. It was floating through something that did not move through time or space, but through memory. Each second passed like a page in a book that had not yet been written. Each breath was like a story waiting to be spoken, and Jace was the writer and the voice. The ship's core opened slowly, not like a door, but like a flower, and inside was not an engine, not a crystal, but something round and dark, and alive. It pulsed with red light, and inside that light were faces, not clear, not sharp, but soft like clouds filled with thought. They looked at Jace not with eyes, but with memory, and he stepped forward, his hand raised. As he touched the core, the red light grew and spread through the ship, not just in the halls or rooms, but through the people. Every crew member felt something shift inside them, a memory that was not as a dream. They had never dreamed. It came like a wind that moved through bone, not cold, not warm, just present. It whispered, "You are more." Dr. Leary cried, not because of pain, but because of truth. She saw herself in the red light, not just as a doctor, not just as a woman, but as a child of something older than she could name. She saw her hands healing not just wounds, but time itself. She saw that every star she had studied was a part of this story, a part of her own story. And now it was open. Jace closed his eyes, and the ship moved again, not through space, but through layers of silence, through rings of forgotten thought, each one thinner than the last, until nothing remained but the color red and the voice that spoke. Without words, it said, "This is a place, this is where it began, this is where it must begin again." They landed not on a planet, not in a world, but in a memory shaped like a garden with no sun, no sky, just light from the ground and warmth from the air. They stepped out, and the garden welcomed them not with sound, but with peace. The trees did not grow. They remembered growing. The rivers did not flow. They remembered movement. In the center of the garden stood a stone that beat like a heart. It was a source. It was a memory. It was the first voice that sang before stars were born. And Jace walked to it, his steps slow and steady, like he had walked this path before he touched the stone. And the garden sang not with music, but with feeling. Every leaf, every shadow, every color became alive. The red light passed through Jace and into the stone, and for a moment everything stopped, not paused, not frozen, just quiet. Even thought itself seemed to rest. And then the stone opened, not broken, not split, but open like it had waited for him, like it had known him before he was born. Inside the stone was a spark, not fire, not light, but something that felt like both. It floated up and into Jace's chest, and he breathed deep and long, and slow the spark settled in him, and the garden changed. It became clearer, brighter, warmer. The crew felt it too, their hearts lighter, their minds quieter, like something heavy had been lifted without touch. The ship called to them, not with alarms, not with voices, but with pull. It was ready. It had grown, it had learned, it had become more. And now it would take them not to war, not to conquest, but to share what they had seen, what they had become, what Jace had become. Jace turned to the crew, his face calm, his voice soft. He said, "We were never alone. We were never weak. The blood was not a curse. It was a map, a path of promise. Now we return not to end things, but to begin again." And the garden faded, not vanished, just folded into the ship, like a dream saved in the heart. And the ship moved forward into a future that was new and old and waiting to be written by the boy who had changed everything, and by those who chose to believe in a red that lived in all humans. And the stars watched in silence, and for the first time they blinked in wonder,